Given a set of outcomes S, if every outcome is equally likely, then the modeled probability of a single outcome is equal to 1 over the size of S. This has the consequence that the probability of some event is the size of the event over the size of S. As an example, let's suppose our experiment was flipping 3 coins. Here, our list of all outcomes would contain heads, 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 tails, heads, tails, heads, heads, tails, 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 heads, heads, tails, heads, tails, 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 heads, and tails, tails, tails. If we assume that every outcome is equally likely, then the probability of any individual outcome, say the probability of flipping 3 heads in a row, is equal to 1 over the size of S, which equals 1 over 8. If we were asked the probability of flipping at least 1 heads, then we would have the number of times we have at least 1 heads divided by the size of S. To calculate the size of the event of flipping at least 1 heads, let's look at our set of all outcomes and highlight which ones have at least 1 heads. We have heads, 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 head, tails, head, tails, heads, head, tail, tails, tails, heads, heads, tail, head, tails, and tail, tail, heads. So our final answer would be 7 over 8. If we were asked at most 1 heads, we'd have a similar situation. Here I'll underline all cases where there's at most 1 heads. We have heads, tails, 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 head, tails, and tails, tails, heads. So our probability of this event is 3/8. Let's also consider the experiment of rolling 2 dice. Here, our set of all possible outcomes includes rolling a black 1 and a red 1, a black 1 and a red 2, and we can continue this to find all possible outcomes. And let's consider the probability of the event of the dice summing to 7. Here again, this will equal the number of ways to roll 2 colored dice that sum to 7 over the size of our all possible outcomes. We can count all outcomes to see that there are 36 possible outcomes. And if we look for the ones that sum to 7, we can find that there are 6 such outcomes. So we get that the probability of rolling 2 dice that sum to 7 is 6 over 36, or exactly 1/6. Let's find the probability of rolling 2 even dice. We know it's going to be something over 36. So let's pick out all cases where both dice are even. We have 2, 2, 2, 4, 4, 2, 4, 4, 2, 6, 4, 6, 6, 2, 6, 4, and 6, 6. To get that there are 9 such ways, and that there is 1/4 chance of rolling 2 dice and having them both be even.